The only guide we have is our desire and our curiosity.
Once you find your purpose, it also leads to a happier life.
Even at the smallest levels, a little bit of rebellion actually helps spark the question of like, what else can you do?
He says, oh, like all fortune's shadow, opaque on arrival, inevitable in retrospect.
I would say everybody should try and create something. It doesn't really matter what it is.
Everything that gets invented started out in a human mind.
AI is the first tool that we have created that allows us to talk to machines in our language.
It is going to be co-creation. It's going to be a creation that humans are intimately involved in and directing.
Human abilities are normally distributed. Human achievements are power law distributed. Let your curiosity have a reign on your actual actions.
Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode of Infinite Loops.
Jim O'Shaughnessy is Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, where Jamie Catherwood is an associate. All opinions expressed by Jim, Jamie, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with my good friend Rohit Krishnan, an Indian name that I get bing right out of the gate. I usually have to practice forever and ever, and that's not the reason I love you, Rohit. It's for your beautiful mind, of course. Welcome back to Infinite Loops. Rohit is one of the things that really drew me to him. He is basically a probabilist, which is, I think, the only right way to think, as many of you who listen or read me know. And he's also a venture capitalist, which leads me to my first line of questioning for Rohit that he didn't know about, gang. So I'm kind of ambushing you here, Rohit. First, welcome.
My absolute pleasure to be here. This is the most fun part of this week/month.
Oh, good. I'm happy to hear that. So I didn't tell you about this, which is normal for listeners or viewers of the podcast. That's kind of the vibe of this podcast. Most of my guests are people like Rohit who are super smart and can think on their feet. And I sometimes hit them with things that we haven't even chatted about, but I've never done it like this bald face before. So are we ready? I love the book American Gods, and they did a TV show of it, which I like to. I'd say read the book first and then watch it if you're interested. But it's Odin, one of the old gods, has enlisted the help of a human, or not so human, if you read the book. And he has this wonderful thing that he says to him, which is as follows. He says to his guy, Shadow Moon, he's talking about prophecies. And he says, oh, like all fortune's shadow, opaque on arrival, inevitable in retrospect. Now, obviously, everyone can see everything in retrospect. And so what I want from you, my good friend, is I would like you to tell me what can VCs, in particular, venture capitalists, learn from the comic opera that is FTX, Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried, when the new CEO taking it over, who, by the way, ran Enron after their fraud, he said, now, this is the guy who did Enron. He said that he had never seen such a foobar, fucked up beyond all recognition situation. And his exact quote in the Wall Street Journal was, it represented a complete failure of corporate controls. You're a VC. Why on earth did all of these name brand VCs not know this?
What a question. All right, let's get into it. So I'll give you first the answer that the VCs would give you. I'm pretty sure. They would say something to the order of, look, our job is to take risks. We take these risks. Some of them don't pan out for whatever reason. Like sometimes things don't work, market's not right. In this case, it happened to be fraud. And who can see through fraud? Nobody can, right? That's not the job you're in. If Sequoia lost $200 million out of 8 billion, 5 billion, whatever that number is, they're like, it happens. We will still return a great portfolio to the great return to the LP. To which I look at that and go, yeah, it's a reasonable argument, right? I mean, like if your job is to take risks and sometimes risks are wrong, and occasionally like your founders will try to cheat you because you know what? There's a real world. I get that. The lesson I take away, however, is much simpler. If you're investing in a financial exchange, now, you're far better versed in the markets than I am, but I've spent a little bit of time in it. I would recommend one of the questions you ask would be, do you guys have an accounting department? It strikes me that like the soap opera parts of the story has gotten more visibility. They all lived in a big house together, Bahamas, party, drugs, whatever. And I'm like, I mean, okay, like, whatever, late 20-year-olds. I don't care. Like, I genuinely don't care. When it comes to the point where I read Ray's first day test, I could not believe what I was reading. When I read things like, yeah, he has never seen anything close to being as screwed up as this. Fine. But why? They don't know who their top creditors are. They don't know who their top debtors are. They don't know whether the money that they have distributed to the grantees or even their venture capital investments not recorded any. I mean, I am a big fan in VC that like VC due diligence is not like private equity due diligence or like an accounting due diligence, right? It's not, right? I mean, you don't invest in a company and go like, we need to do a forensic accounting of every line item cash because that's not your job. But basic common sense would have told you that like, guys, they don't have anybody. They don't have their lawyer, their accounting firm, audit firm had an office in the metaverse. Like, I'm like, there are red flags all over this thing. And if you were looking at all of the red flags and go like, yeah, they're young, they will fix this. Let's invest. And it's like a 20 million valuation, 100 million valuation. I would still get it. At a 30 billion valuation, I mean, 30 billion is like almost half of Goldman, right? Like this is not small by any stretch of imagination. Even if you think it's going to go from 30 billion to like 1 trillion, you should expect a certain basic level of hygiene when you're running a company. And even if all of these things sound like, oh, so boring paperwork, I'm like, you're an exchange. Like, you're a financial exchange. Like, they're not running, stamp collecting. It's a financial exchange. People put money in and trading. They were Jane Street trained traders and quants. And you couldn't understand that, like, you need a back office, like, or a middle office, or even an accounting system that knew how much money you owed to somebody. So the lesson I learned in some ways is like, I get the risk point. I don't give too much blame for the due diligence. Like they didn't pick up the corporate structure because VCs don't understand corporate structures anyway, right? Like who cares? VCs don't understand regulatory risks. That's fine. Like you kind of put all risk in a giant bucket and go like, should we take this? What's the percentage? Probably. That's all. But like the basics got left out. That just strikes me as crazy. I'm like, how do you invest in a company that doesn't really have an accountant? How do you do that? Like, at Series B, when I look at a company and they don't have like a CRO to handle revenues or a CMO who's not good enough, you kind of look at that and go like, maybe you should hire that. You don't have a board. How does that happen? Like $30 billion dealing with, I don't even remember, like billions of trade. They made $1 billion in revenue last year. a bit,
Or
I mean,
so they
supposedly.
say.
Supposedly, yeah. It's like, who could even know, right? And you're like, you don't have a board? How do you not have a board? Like somebody, anybody to sit around. Theranos had a board. I mean, like, this is, this is, this saga is going to go down in history as one of the weirdest, craziest, most insane stories about like the world that we live in. It is insane that this happened. I do not understand. I mean, in the beginning, very beginning of the story, I was like, maybe Binance is just playing a game, right? I mean, they did some shady stuff and they're pushing them down. Good job. I mean, this happened. Then it came out that like they did some bad balance sheet accounting. They kept their own tokens on the balance sheet. I was like, okay, stupid, but still understandable because their tokens were not just like random, right? Their tokens were ability to get discounts on their own trading platform. Trading platform generates $1 billion in revenue. You get some 10% discount. The tokens are worth something. Extrapolate to like the next 10 years. Fine. Tokens are worth $1 billion, 5 billion. You can make some numbers out of it. But like, but when you have like every single number is questionable, you don't know where you invested. You don't know who you owe money to. You don't know how much customers gave you. You have no internal controls over people sending money from one place to the other. And it's like your job is to send money. You don't have another job. This is not like, I mean, I can't even think of one, right? It's like when you go to Amazon and the thing that they're supposed to do is send you packages and they're like, yeah, we don't know. Like, like you're like, but that's the only, that is the job. Everything else is like extra, right? Your venture capital is extra. Oh man, I could go on about this, but do the basics. Come on. Like, just do the basics.
Yeah. So like and I don't ask this question to paint with a broad brush or indict any particular VC. As you know, O'Shaughnessy Ventures has a vertical that is venture capital. We call it Infinite Adventures, the original name for venture capital. And I'm also willing to concede that my own experience in asset management, one of the most highly regulated businesses in the United States, has been like due diligences that would make you look forward to a proctology exam. I mean, like this much of a stack of paperwork, multiple visits, checking all references, checking I mean, literally some of the largest firms that decided to do business with us, we're talking like a 10-week process on the due diligence side. So I know that I probably am not seeing it clearly enough because of my own memory and history of dealing with due diligence and whatnot. But the reason I'm so fascinated by this is because, we're doing venture. And like, if you can learn from the mistakes of others, you better learn because that's a really rich mine or vein for you to mine. One of the things that surprised me was the almost, not almost, the cavalier attitude throwing around like massive, as you yourself point out, 30 billion valuation, big checks. People are apparently playing games during the presentation and people are doing thumbs up. Like,
yeah.
Is that just me as a nascent? I've been doing private investing since 2007. So it's not my very first rodeo, but like, is that part of the culture? What am I missing? Tell me what I'm missing.
No. So I have a more nuanced point of view on this. It is not part of the culture. Let's get that out of the way.
Okay.
But I equate that a little bit to like, if you're on a boring Zoom call, sometimes you look at Twitter on the side or whatever, like fine. And this is maybe a different version of that. And in some ways, I feel like when people succeed beyond our wildest dreams or people fail beyond their wildest dreams, we ascribe a lot of mythology to them.
Mm.
So when like Sequoia had this thing put up on their website, right? This exceptionally adulatory article written about Sam Bankman-Fried and like how he is the future of, I don't know, many things. Um, and the in that at that time, the fact that the partners were so impressed with the conversation, but he was also playing League of Legends on the side, was seen as this like cute eccentricity detail that effectively should tell you that this guy is no ordinary guy. He is like Superman. Now you look at that and go like, oh my God, what the hell were you thinking? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
he couldn't even respect the time to talk to his investors who are putting in $200 million, top VC firm in the world, a few minutes. This is hubris. And they're both kind of true, right? I mean, like like the outcome colors everything that kind of came before. So the I am not particularly fussed by the fact that he did it because clearly it didn't have any impact on his ability to answer questions when Sequoia was asking, presumably, because they invested. Um, I think it's rude. You should do it. But then fine. Like, I get that sometimes people are rude. Like, all right, not my style, but like if he wants to do it, do that. But to do that while you're also doing a quasi Ponzi feels like a step too far. I'm pretty sure Madoff wasn't reading books while he was ripping people off when they're all like,
You're probably right.
like I think he paid a bit of attention. Or like, he at least got an accountant to kind of, I mean, he also didn't get like the best accountant, by the way. Like he got this dime store guy, right? Um, but at least like he tried. And I think there is hubris and then there is hubris. And this is Icarus style. I mean, this is like, you were basically asking for your wings to be melted and fall down onto the earth. I mean, what the hell were you doing? Because you look at the list of things that happened, it's like a menu where everything is ticked off, right? Like a buffet, everything is wrong. It's like, I mean, the hiring was off, firing was off, top management was off, there is no board, there's no CEO, the structure was extraordinarily opaque for no particular reason. Nobody knew where the money was at any given point in time. Relationship with the investors was screwed up, relationship with the regulators. Apparently, he tried to cozy up. I'm not a big believer in the fact that just because you give money, you get influence, because I mean, if $70 million got you influence with the US government, I think we would be living in a very different world. And I'm like, you kind of go down the list and you pretty much just like a story of like every single box being ticked of red flags. I mean, there is only red. I don't know what the green flag is here.
Right.
Like, I can't see one, right? Yes, your exchange was growing. That's the green flag. And like, in 20 and 21, we also went through this phase where everybody was on Zoom all the time. You never met anybody really face to face. And at that point, it kind of, we also had the most insane mania, both in tech as well as crypto particularly. I think people started excusing a lot of erratic behavior as like seemingly the new normal. And this probably falls a little bit into one of those as well, right? I mean, like, when everything is going well and people think you're Jesus Christ, all of a sudden, they're like, oh, no. Sam gets, of course, he can play League of Legends as well as negotiate a term sheet or whatever. But like, even if you can do that, ideally reserve the right to do that for when you're actually right. I mean, to me, this is the most important bit. And also, like, even if you can do that, just don't. I mean, it's rude.
I said to my wife not too long ago that I never thought that I would live to see the day that having good manners would be an asymmetric opportunity.
I swear to God, it's insane. I mean, it's the most. I'm like, why would you do this? Why? Like, why do own goals, right? Like, other people are gonna try to hurt you anyway. Just don't help them.
Yeah, right. So many interesting themes that you went into there. And first off, like everyone listening, watching, we are doing this retrospectively, and this has always been one of my things. Of course, Rohit and I are going to be able to tick off every glaring problem that, quite frankly, I certainly didn't. Now, I wasn't paying attention because it landed in my ignore pile. I'm a cognitive miser, and like I didn't understand what they were trying to do, so I just ignored it. But so hindsight bias, of course, everyone can be ticking off the same sort of things. So it's hard often. And by the way, let's also get it out on the record. Sequoia just happened to be chosen as it because there was a lot of material. Yes. Sequoia is also one of the most legendary of the venture capital firms. So this should in no way be seen as an attack and or a criticism of Sequoia. I'm trying to get behind the thinking in general. And so I'm trying, and it was why I decided, I have Rohit today. I can ask him directly. I am trying to learn as one who's going to be doing a lot more venture capital. Yeah. What can I learn from this? What can I incorporate into my own due diligence, et cetera, that is not specific to that, to like that behavior, et cetera. So for example, hey, if you're on the island of misfit toys, I'm probably going to want to talk to you because those are the people who aren't the traditional, what is Taleb's thing? Always pick the guy who doesn't look the part, right? So I definitely already, if I understood that space, which I really don't. And so since I don't invest in it, nor do I own anything in it, just because my opinion is just that. It's an opinion and everyone has an opinion. So mine are as valueless as everyone else's.
Can I tell you the one lesson that I take away, the simplest meta lesson?
Please.
Don't let anyone push you into a decision that you don't want to make. It's pretty much as simple as that. And you worked in asset management and you ran a quant asset management. By definition, quant asset management is the game of don't let anyone push you into a decision you don't want to make. By definition, this is the human version of that, right? And in venture, you're pushed into a decision you don't want to make all day long. All day. That's all you do. That's effectively your game, someone else is putting a term sheet. Their competitor just raised a round. This is moving fast. This great company, great team. Speed is all the only competitive advantage you have. It is also the biggest competitive disadvantage that you have. Because it's an advantage if you're willing to move fast. It's a disadvantage if you're getting pushed into it. So when things are going, up and to the right, everybody goes oh man, we have to get into the top deal of this decade. Because if FTX was not a debacle, and I'm, if it didn't turn out to be that, the Sequoia LPs might ask them, why didn't you get into it? It's a fair question for them to ask as well. So there's a bit of FOMO, you have to kind of do these kinds of things. And they're a wonderful investor, right? Just like you said. So, we don't know what they could have seen, what they could not have seen. I think to me, it kind of comes back to your job is not to make no mistakes. And in fact, specifically in venture, your job is to make a mistake about 30 to 50% of the time. Right. If you're not wrong at least that often, you're not doing your job right. And you will not be able to do this by doing an 8-week deep due diligence. You can't. That's just not even in the realm of possibility for any of the companies you want to be able to do it for. Right. So you have to slice and dice somewhere, right? You got to pattern recognize something and say that founder has something. And sometimes they'll be frauds or something they won't. That's okay. What you can do is to look for exactly what you said. Ignore pile, too hard pile, complicated pile. This seems shady pile. And then just kind of move it to that. And for that, I am more of a Buffett style thought process of if it doesn't tick the box, it's okay. You don't need to hit every ball that comes your way, right? It's okay. Let it sail by. It's fine. Because if you try and play everyone else's game, you're going to get pushed into making decisions you do not necessarily want to have to make. And sometimes it's speed. Sometimes it's lack of information. in FTX's case, even after bankruptcy filing, Sam was trying to raise capital and he was sending around bullet points on his sheet. And forgetting the chutzpah, etc. there, I think the fact is like, he still doesn't have financials anybody trusts, right? Like, to me, that's the most interesting part of this whole process of like, this is a failure of basics. This is not a failure of like some ridiculously, like I wrote a thing comparing it to the '08 crisis. And one of the differences in the '08 crisis is like, '08 crisis had multiple parties actively working to make this into a crisis, right? This is sort of a dumb man's crisis. Like '08 had like, regulatory bodies got captured, like S&P and Moody's got captured in order to write specific, like, ratings for the bond. Like there was such a layer after layer after layer of problematic behavior. Here, it was basically somebody needed to ask, do you have an accountant? Which feels like the kind of thing that shouldn't happen in real life.
The other thing that fascinates me, and you've written about this quite a bit, so I'd be really interested in your take on this part. I am again, I perhaps am captive of my priors. That's always probably a comms razor. Probably I am. Yeah. But so one of my priors is that you made the point, quants become quants because they understand that they are just as fallible as everyone running human OS is going to be at risk of falling into the same holes as everyone else, myself included, you included, all the VCs who fund it here included. And so one of my pretty significant beliefs is that narrative follows price, not the other way around. Price doesn't follow narrative, narrative follows price. But I'm fascinated at the same time, I believe that everything is storytelling. And if you can't, for example, in my early days of What Works on Wall Street, I used to give speeches in which I said, I'm going to tell you a series of stories that illustrate why you should not pay attention to stories when making investment decisions, right? I had to turn it into a story because that's in our base code of human OS is storytelling, narrative, all of that. So I guess I have sort of a 3-part question for you. Number one, to be charitable, do you think that there is a non-zero chance that he was so delusional that he actually believed his own story, first off? Secondly, as evidence against that, he recently, a few days ago, I think, was chatting via text, big mistake, by the way, in which he basically said, oh yeah, woke capitalism, it's just a total grift. It's a total grift. So that sounds like a guy with a little harder edge than the nice guy who's deluding himself into thinking he truly is this visionary. So that's the second part here. But then the third part is like, is there a probabilistic methodology one could use to sort of try and take apart a narrative to the point where you get the red flag that is like, you know what? This narrative's fantastic, great story, but there's just so many parts of it that don't add up. Or no, I'm forever looking for algorithms, right? So maybe there isn't one, but take them in order. Do you think was he truly with delusional and he believed him? That would be somewhat negated by his comments about woke capitalism being the biggest grift in a long time. And then the money shot, for me at least, is if you can give me a way to disambiguate narratives such that your probability of finding all those red flags increases, that would be a really nice tool to have in your kit as a venture capitalist.
So I'll answer them in order. And funnily enough, I do have an answer for you on the third one, which I didn't think I would when you were asking. I don't know whether he believed the narrative exactly as he portrayed it, to answer your question. I think the way I see it is a little bit that like he started both his giving campaign as well as his FTX running Alameda campaign, both of them with the ambition that he's going to make a tremendous amount of money and try to give it away. I kind of take it for granted that he did actually believe that, quite frankly.
Okay.
And the reason I believe that is that he said it repeatedly quite a long time. I mean, I kind of waffled based on his text exchanges, but it feels at least like this was something that he genuinely wanted to do. Now, the question is like, he was always planning to run a con, and I'm not entirely sure. Because if you're planning to run a con and you're a relatively smart guy, you would do a better job than this.
Right, exactly. That's almost
So to me, the combined uh so if that's not the case, to me, effectively what that means is he was basically a captive of his belief that he can keep betting big because he was much smarter than everybody else, much better than everybody else. He can actually like do it like a phenomenal job and like, give away, you know, $20 billion instead of 10, $100 billion instead of 10, whatever that is. And that's a different narrative, right? It's not quite a hero or a villain narrative. It's just wrong, right? Like it's just, and humans are rationalization creatures. We can rationalize anything. I mean, when I sort of play with my son, when he comes up with rationalizations that make no sense by default, since he was like 2 years old, 3 years old. And that's because we have the ability to start grammatically saying sentences like, I did X because, without knowing what comes after, and our brain fills that gap beautifully. What that means is like, the woke capitalism stuff, etc. This is all after the fact, right? I mean, he's fallen into, well, he needs to kind of rationalize his way through. So this is the only way he can do it. So, you know, I don't know. Like we can all choose our lenses to look at him as like a hero, a villain, a fallen angel, whatever. Like I think ultimately I kind of look at it as a example of hubris gone awry. Now it's all rationalizations looking back, but it's hubris gone awry and just a terribly misguided sense of what works in the markets, which if he had continued in Jane Street would have gotten disabused really fast. Because guess what? Equity, fixed income, currency markets are pretty good at that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
And very
those crypto where, you get to play a fool for a little while longer. So the next step, therefore, becomes like, how do you kind of guard against some of these things, right? And from a venture investing point of view, your job is to create a narrative about the future that you can believe, or at least 2-3 narratives, and you got to kind of believe one of them. Now, you can get seduced by narratives like very quickly because that's any CEO who's good is good at selling the narrative. That's their job. That's their one job.
Yep.
So you can get caught up in that all the time. To me, the way I solve it is at least by like breaking up that narrative into its component parts, right? Because every company narratives are not that complex. They're not like American Gods, right? I mean, they don't have like 15 subplots and things moving. Like, it's fine. We can all figure it out. So you look at what does this mean for, the 5 or 6 components separately, the market, the customers, the go-to-market, unit economics, finance, whatever. Like, I mean, choose your own. I have a spreadsheet. It has not that many, like 20 factors, which is not much. And if I can independently think through those 20 factors and even put a qualitative 1, 2, 3 for the company that I'm looking at, it instantly gives me clarity about whether I believe the narrative or not. It's a little bit like, I don't know, you watch a movie and the movie like thrills you and you're deep in the movie, etc. But you read a review and they're like, oh no, there were these like 15 plot holes that you missed. And you're like, yeah, I missed it because like, when I'm hearing it, I love it. And it's the same process in reverse, right? Let's look for the plot holes and then you will at least know what risk you're taking. You will say like, look, I don't know if they can get, I don't know, from today they have 10 customers. We need them to get 10,000 customers. I don't know if they can get it. Maybe. But at least you know what risk you're kind of signing up for. Or their product today is only good for like tiny companies. Can they sell to enterprises? We don't know. Maybe they'll figure it out. But at least we know what risk we are taking to get to that final end state. And this is not to say that the narratives will turn out to be true, because they won't, no matter what the narrative you sign up to. But at the very least, the narratives you sign up to might start like guiding you away from making the stupid mistake. And hopefully you can make slightly more sophisticated mistakes, which is all you can hope for.
The ability to deconstruct a narrative, I think, if used properly, is close to a superpower. And I think your thing about hubris is bang on. Again, I have been around a long time, and I have run into a lot of people. And I was just journaling about this the other day, actually. And I was looking for characteristics that like all of the big flameouts had. And virtually all of them, the protagonist was beyond, hubris would be an understatement for their belief in themselves, in what they were saying. And some of these, by the way, were not Ponzi schemes. They were not criminal or fraudulent. These were people who were like Icarus. They just flew too close to the sun, and their wings melted, and they didn't have a clue, right? Because they had so convinced themselves that they were smarter, faster, better than anyone else. So one of the great things that I have going for me, I think, despite all of my many known deficiencies, is the fact that if you're around in markets for as long as I've been around in markets, markets beat that out of you. If you can stay, you're not going to be filled with hubris, because the market will have repeatedly reminded you what a dumb shit you are. And you get to the point where you change your entire way of looking at things. You become very probabilistic in your thoughts. You liberally say, I don't know. And you acquire all of the, what I view as skills and advantages to making these kinds of decisions. So that's definitely one of them that I've seen that carries on throughout and historically as well, right?
Completely. You know what's funny? I was just reading this about the Tiger hedge fund, obviously, that had the spectacular blowout where they lost more money than they have made in the last 20 years, effectively.
Whoops.
and like, it's an example, right? Like, I don't know whether it was hubris or bad risk management or just growing too fast, but like, if you're in the markets long enough, like, survival is important. I mean, my respect for like, that's why like Berkshire, etc., it grows every year, because our Rentec for that matter, because like, every market condition, like they just stick to what they know, what they don't know, and like do what they know, and like do not mess with the market, or do not presume that you are the all-knowing all-stars who can figure everything else out. Because
I'll tell you, it's like the first bit of advice that I would give to younger people joining the firm is, if you ever get the idea that you're right and the market is wrong, you're wrong and the market is right. You are 100%. Never, ever smarter than the market, because the market is the collection of all human minds that aggregate down to a price and to a vibe, if you will, to use my friend Kyla Scanlon's terminology. And if you don't know that, you're going to be carried out feet first. Pretty much all the time.
Of course, because ultimately, like, the funny thing about playing, the reason I like this so much is because the interplay of narrative and fact and reality kind of blends very nicely together, right? Because you're kind of, in venture especially, you're trying to create a story about the future. Because unlike secondary markets, the thing that you're investing in doesn't exist yet.
Right.
Right? It'll exist at some point in the future. which means like stories are important and that's what you're actually investing in, which means like they will blend together enough that it's very easy for to believe your own sort of Kool-Aid, right?
Sure.
I mean, in fact, some might say necessary. I don't think so, but like that is the job, so to speak. So
Yeah.
you have to be reasonably probabilistic to step back and go like, nah, you know what? Like maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was right, but lucky, wrong, but lucky, or right, but unlucky, whatever.
Unlucky. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a combination of factors there where like your success is never all your own, your failures are never all your own, and there's some combination so you can learn and kind of move forward.
Yeah. My friend Danny Duke calls that resulting, and it's one of the cornerstones of why I use base rates. Like if you look at an investment that say went sour, and then you decide I was wrong, I made a mistake, you could be wrong there. You could have, the reasons for making that investment could have been absolutely sound. And it just so happened that the timing was off or the whatever was off.
Yeah.
That's why the snapshot, and conversely, and much more damaging, in my opinion, is you make an investment for really stupid reasons and it pays off.
Yeah.
And is it hard it's so hard. Luckily, I had the good fortune of doubling my money on my first options trade when I was 19 years old. So I, of course, thought that I was God's gift to options trading and that I was a certifiable genius and that I would quickly be one of the richest market participants. And then, of course, the market kicked the shit out of me for the balance of that year to disabuse me of that fantasy and hallucination.
I think it's one of those things where you're like, what game are you trying to play is a super important question. And you need to have an answer, right? And you need to know, like, you can't be all things to all people. So you got to kind of choose like, no, oh, this was my strategy, not what I thought it was. Or like everywhere, like everybody did that, right? I mean, even back in the day when Keynes was trying to invest according to his amazing macro theories, did currency speculation, did really well. Then it all went to hell. Then he was like, you know what? Like, I think all of that was lovely and I like it. Clearly, it was like good at the theoretical aspect of it. But when it came to practice, I will pick the stocks that I like most and like keep them close and do the more Ben Graham style approach, which worked very well for him thereafter. So, like, ultimately, you got to choose your game. You try and play everyone else's game, you're going to fail just because you won't know enough. I think it's as true in the markets as in life.
I totally agree. And it's reminiscent when you mentioned Keynes. I thought immediately you were going to the quote about why the markets are so hard is that they're a beauty contest, but you have to guess. What you have to guess is what the other people are going to pick as the most beautiful person.
Yes.
Not necessarily what you would pick as the most beautiful person. And so he had some delightful quips. And then the other guy who gets everything attributed to him that he didn't say half of, Oscar Wilde, maybe or maybe didn't say, be yourself, everyone else is taken. So I totally, and this has been my advice continually for all my career, like, don't copy me, don't copy Rohit.
Yeah.
Listen to both of us, read our books or our blogs or whatever, take away what resonates with you, and then do this continually and build your own process that is unique to you because it resonates with you. You've done your homework, but the minute you start trying to copy someone else, unless it's just a formula, well, what you're going to fuck up there is you probably don't have the emotional fortitude that formula investor has. Yes. Like sometimes people would say to me, like, what are you most proud of about your career as an asset manager? And I give them the answer. I'm most proud that I never emotionally overrode a model, actually, more than anything else.
Yeah.
Because that's the hard stuff. Like, coming up with the algos, especially since we're all using the same data sets anyway, hint, all quant models look a lot alike, everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're using the same data.
I think the emotional fortitude is extraordinarily it's not talked about much at all. I mean, it's talked about generically, like in sort of circles, but it's never like explicitly mentioned as, something folks should think about for themselves, because it's good practice, as opposed to like, whatever. You need to believe in yourself, or like there are these generic pieces of
Yeah,
advice which are
yeah,
not
yeah.
helpful or actionable. But the
Right.
fact is, like, yeah, you should try and figure out what you are good at and what game you want to play, and then go play that game. Not necessarily because that game will, get you whatever super rich or successful, but like that is your game. So like you can't go off and play someone else's game, because like you're gonna fail and be miserable. This way, at least only one of those is an option.
And what I love about it, and it's going to lead me into my second line of thought with you that I want to get your thoughts on, because you wrote an interesting piece about it. But this idea that you've really got to, this is applicable elsewhere, not just investing. Like people that I know that are the happiest have found some purpose for their own life, right? And if they are, like, one of my purposes is to be useful, and that's a broad category. So I can always say I'm on purpose today.
Yeah.
But once you find your purpose, once you find what you're good at,
Mm-hmm.
it also leads to a happier life in
Yeah.
most circumstances. Sure, if you're ultimately, like, one of our themes as we roll out O'Shaughnessy Ventures is creativity is a curse.
Mhm.
And it's a curse because you can't help it, right?
Yes.
You just gotta keep doing and
Yeah.
keep doing it. It's, as one of my colleagues said, a magnificent obsession. And
Yeah.
if you have one of those, like, that's great, good, follow it. But it's not gonna be
Yeah.
a smooth road. But it leads me into the piece that you wrote about why isn't there a philosophy of business? And I was fascinated by that piece
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons. When I read it, I actually went back and looked at my original notes when I read it. And in the margin, I wrote, well, maybe it's because people had already confused economics as a philosophical description of
Yeah.
business, which, as one with a degree in economics, I can tell you it ain't that. It
No.
really ain't that. But there's a good book that I actually did a thread about that maybe, and I want to get you to read the book, and then we'll come back on and
Yep.
have you on another podcast and we'll talk about it. But it's called The Genius of the Beast, a Radical Revision of Capitalism. And it's by a guy by the name of Howard Bloom,
Mhm.
who started out in science and then went to business. And so what worked for him was finding all of the ways that markets were like the natural world, and like
Right.
like humans. And he makes some really interesting statements. Among them, capitalism offers more to believe in than all religions. That was one of the things that he said. And he said it also, from all the religions, from Christianity to Marxism, promised to raise the poor and unfortunate to better circumstances. And capitalism, at least the Western variety, did it in 300 years. It achieved what for millennia those ideologies could not achieve. And then he makes the case that that's probably because capitalism is a complex adaptive system, like most things in the world in which we live. And then he continues on by saying, if you pay attention to human emotion, you're going to understand markets vastly better than if you try to, use all the jargon of commoditization and,
Yeah.
TAM, what's the total addressable market? He says basically everything springs from human desire. And you made the point about your son.
Yeah.
There's a GIF I always use, which is a kid saying, because of reasons, right? And it's lovely to me because I passionately believe that markets are come out of the minds of humans and are entirely based
Mhm.
on human OS, and that Bloom would make he would submit that most of our decisions are made emotionally,
Yeah.
and then we paper them over afterwards with rational arguments. And then he goes on to finally say, markets don't emerge ex nihilo, right?
Mhm.
Markets are created by humans. They are very consistent with complex adaptive systems. And more importantly, they're very consistent with human evolution and the way a lot of natural systems work
Right.
too. So what do you think? Do you think that that's closing in on more of a philosophy of business and markets than economics and all the other?
I think it definitely starts to get at something that is super interesting. Um, I mean, the reason I started wondering about this was, well, two things. Number one is the fact that, you know, look around us, like business endeavors are literally, you know, everywhere, right? I mean, it's like asking fish what's water, like,
Mm-hmm.
David Foster Wallace said. It's very
Mm-hmm.
much that. Most of us sort of spend, a third of our day, whatever, half of our waking life in the pursuit of something that effectively nobody seems to think a huge amount about, apart from saying, like, either it has to be your life's purpose, like we said before, for some lucky folk, or for a lot of others, just a way to kind of punch the clock, get something so they can go out and buy some resources to do other different things. And I felt like we have a philosophy of education, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, philosophy of physics in particular. Like,
We also have a philosophy of philosophy, as you
we
know.
do actually. And I'm like, okay, this feels like something that we should think about a little bit stronger in terms of sort of why we end up doing these things. Um, Spoiler alert, I don't have an answer, but it's something I'm going to think about quite a lot more. The second reason that I thought about it was like, and this is new, so I'm going to think through while I'm talking to you. Science used to be pre-paradigmatic at one point of time, right?
Mhm.
We had folks like, I don't know, banging things together, trying stuff out, seeing what happens. It was very trial and error. They had some notion, some idea of what would be good, try it out, see what happens, rinse and repeat. Um, at some point, it started getting more systematized, closer to the Enlightenment in many cases, or like the Industrial Revolution when it suddenly took the next step. And my point of view about business as it stands today is that it is the way by which the knowledge that exists in one bundle gets democratized and pushed to everybody else. The distilled knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
The only way we have found to do it. Like, you and I are, the way we are talking now, we wouldn't be able to do this with pure science. We need business in the middle so that it can actually reach everybody else and do all of the fun stuff, including economies of scale and bringing the price curve down. So as a consequence, like one way I look at it is like, I tend to separate the markets part of it from the business part of it. And I'll tell you why. Like, it's a bit of an artificial separation, but like the markets, because it can exist for trade purposes, right? Like, even if you go back, whatever, call it 1,000 years, you will have 2,000 years, 10,000 years. We'll have people performing market-like transactions because all you need is some version of, I agree to give you X, you agree to give me Y. Boom, we have an exchange rate, right? You can do some market-based activity. You come forward a little further. When I looked at money, we've had inflationary panics in like the 1200s. Before
Yeah.
that as well. I mean, I've
Oh,
read
yeah,
stuff
yeah, yeah.
about like silver getting diluted, all sorts of fun stuff.
So by the way, that's why people would bite the coin. They would bite it to see if it had been
It's real.
shaved. Yeah, it's very real. Yeah.
So the markets exist as this way for us to effectively create some form of impersonal trust-based mechanism so that like you can trade goods with each other. If you know them, you can kind of create the exchange rate. If you don't, then the different exchange rate. Fine. All good. We can do that.
And
Business
just to interject, like the way I look at markets and the way I look at money even is they are information technologies. That's
Yes.
the way I define them.
100%.
And so when you think about them that way, your separation of business and exchanges makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the business case that I'm saying here is like we had different sorts of businesses for a long time, right? Family owned, guild type businesses for a while, which slowly started getting professionalized at some point. I would say, at least in the Western world, sort of 1500, 1600, 1700 ish. 1600 is when the East India Company type ones were set up. It had some um, companies that came before it, didn't do so well. And all of a sudden, you started having a mechanism to pool capital together, which had an objective to go off and actually do something. And the way I look at this mechanism of spread is that it both incentivizes the front end where you have to have people figuring out what the purpose needs to be. And it could be very simple, like we need to take a ship and go to India, get spices and bring it back, which is like moving goods from point A to point B. Or it could be things like, um, the what's engine. Like I created something super cool and I think I can build a business around it. Like it incentivizes both those things. That's the exploration side. And here's like the invention side that it can actually incentivize, which then goes on to fill. This is where I come closer to the book's thesis. I think of it as a little bit like ecological niches, right? I mean, there are companies that are, our whatever want landscape that lies in our head has different bits and bobs of want. Some of which we know, some of which we don't know. Like I never knew I would needed, I don't know, 2-day delivery until Amazon gave it to me, but now I kind of need it, right? Like,
Right.
so that exists as a niche, and somebody will exploit that niche. And that niche, you can think of it as the broader part of the convenience mega niche within which sort of little tiny niches exist in different places. And some business will actually go and say, I know that want exists. I have a bunch of raw materials and stuff here. Together, I'm going to go solve that. So there is a way in which we can think of, use natural kind of um, uh, language, that's the right word to say, or concepts to try and understand why it spreads in some places, why it stays in some places, why it dies out in different places. Like you're serving, mochi to travelers in Japan, like who are on a pilgrimage to a site. That need hasn't died for 1500 years. Guess what? Neither has your business, as long as you don't do anything silly. Um, However, at the same place, like what about the people who are building temples by, using wood? That business has a problem because construction of new temples is not a growth business today. It was
Right.
until recently. So, like, I think that's the way I think of, at least that's my conceptualization of how the a philosophy of business might look. This is with like wide error bar variances, and it's very much me thinking out loud. Because ultimately, the reason we need it is also like this is very macro level, but right, even from an individual point of view, I there are many things that push us to go off and do different types of work, right? Like curiosity, exploration, need for resources, money, love, attention, working with people that you love, like whatever, like there's a combination there. And we kind of sideline almost all of that and replace it with one single monetary metric of salary or like one single career metric of advancement, which is, I don't think that's fair. It might have been fair for a short period, like in the last like 30 years, but it's definitely not fair any longer. I think the next decade is going to bring a whole lot more complexification of this particular sector compared to sort of anything that has come before.
Oh, I totally agree. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I started O'Shaughnessy Ventures was because I think, as we were chatting prior to starting the podcast, I think that all the old models are collapsing, and
Yeah.
those who are tuned into that are at a decided advantage over those who are not. And on back to markets though, and quoting Bloom again, he
Yeah.
says, desire is the force behind every exchange, behind every transaction, be it money or information. He said, coin is massed attention. Cash is emotional need. And then you had Robert Anton Wilson, who famously said, we used to be in clans and hunter gatherers, and it was meat that we shared. And
Yeah.
then when we left there, we had to figure out some way to exchange things with other people. And so we invented what he called fun coupons, i.e. currency.
Yeah.
But, into that, you also have this great quote from my friend Rory Sutherland, who says, one of the single greatest strengths of free markets is their ability to generate innovative things whose popularity makes no sense.
Yes.
So what you were saying earlier about it being much more complex than just like, here's the salary. I'm going
Yeah.
to do it because I want that salary. Yeah, okay. So the 50s, the man in the gray flannel suit, the whole, that was an anomaly. That's what I always try
Yes.
to get people to understand. The end of World War II to like the early 1970s, that was the anomaly. That
Yeah.
was not the norm.
Not before or after. Yes.
Not before or after. And it's like, especially in America, people like have a hard time with that. And I'm like, do you realize that we produced 86% of all cars sold worldwide in the early 1950s, not because we were great, but because we had demolished all of their manufacturing facilities in all of our competitors' country.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I could not agree with Bloom's quote more, like desire being the root. I think I would probably have an addition to say to that, which is that desire helps in terms of consumption and in terms of some types of investment. I think the one added nuance that has come, especially now, is that accumulation allows you to basically make manifest things that you want to see that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Because
Correct.
investment is a privilege, right? Like
Correct.
investment is you effectively trying to do time travel. You're trying to see something and make it manifest, or like magic, whatever you want to call it. And you can't easily do that, honestly, if you're, purely thinking of it in terms of sort of, I have X, you have Y, let's transact. Like you need to have a bit more of theory that sort of stands a step above, where you can kind of look at the world of tomorrow is going to have, I don't know, crazy, amazing AI, automatically generated movies. We're going to have, or like cars that run itself, or like organizations that run itself for that matter, better materials, I don't know, space elevator. Like you're going to have to kind of, those things only exist currently in our imagination. We don't even know how to make it manifest. But if we actually put people's ingenuity towards it, which is what, which is a particular type of desire, I suppose, then we can kind of make that manifest.
Again, we are incredibly aligned on our thinking on this, because that is, again, we get back to emotions, don't we? We get back to striving. We get back to human ingenuity. We get back to my North Star, David Deutsch, and his whole idea that we're at the beginning of infinity, only because we have these imaginations, and only because we are, at least for right now, we are the only sentient explainers and connectors that we can talk to.
Yes.
So if everything that gets invented started out in a human mind, and
100%.
And for a variety of reasons, many of them need-based, but often not need-based. For example, you mentioned space elevator. Remember John Kennedy's famous speech in which he announces that we're going to go to the moon.
Yeah.
So when JFK made that speech in the early 60s, we had no idea how we could build a rocket to go to the moon. And it was him putting it out into space state reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
When all of a sudden, the human ingenuity started getting ignited. Oh, that's a good idea, but it's really hard. And to which Kennedy replied, we're doing this not because it's easy, but because it is hard. Exactly.
It's one of the best lines of any speech ever, honestly.
Truly, I agree. Because it captures why progress has been mostly up and to the right directionally.
Yeah.
Right. Because we ignite and then combine the ingenuity of human beings. And of course, because back to Robert Anton Wilson, we can now time bind because we have books, right? And so you can send your ideas into the future. And now, as you know, because I'm the chairman of the board, we have things like Stability AI with generative AI, which I believe is going to be the third tech revolution.
Yeah.
And,
I've written about the combinatorial stuff a little bit, right? I think ultimately, like in the stuff that I've written before, one of the limiting factors has always been that our ability to surf the latent space and identify the correct combinations of things to explore has always been limited by us, right? If I have to learn how to create, I don't know, anything, this laptop, like there's a heck of a lot of stuff that I'm going to have to go and learn. However, currently we muddle through because we can kind of figure out like, oh, I know about software, you know about hardware, someone else knows about chip manufacturing, someone else knows glass, whatever. Combine them together, we can make something interesting. As things get more and more complicated, at some point, combining a bunch of things to create something new becomes harder because like there's a whole lot of combinations that make like honestly no sense, right? I mean, I don't know what will happen if we combine glass, software, hardware, chips, GPUs, and this glass, but like probably nothing good. But you know, as the number of components increase and number of combinations increase, like our ability to surf that latent space, the only guide we have is our desire and our curiosity, right? Like, I mean, that's all we have. Somebody's got to say, that sounds interesting, and then we got to figure out how. So, in some ways, I find that like the very unreality of the generative models that we have so far are the interesting bits. Because, like, these are models that are trained on vast swaths of human input information, but they have no idea what the world is like.
right.
And which is both why oftentimes you get like crazy outputs, not real outputs, lies, whatever. I mean, and I'm like, it doesn't need to be a lie. It can be a truth from a different Everettian branch, right? It's not truth from our reality. It's a truth from a different reality. Because how the hell would the AI know? It doesn't know what the world is, right? Why would it? It's not evolved in this world like we are. That's our job to kind of use those
Right.
to create new things. If you want it to do that as well, then what are we going to do? Like at some point, it will get better and then you will get better. I mean, it's a dance. I mean, that's the whole point. So the fact that it will allow us to surf that latent space and identify better combinations or better things that can help solve our curiosity is one of the major leaps that I feel we're definitely going to have going forward.
Definitely. And something that I am always telling people is that for the foreseeable future, this idea of sentient AI is a pipe dream. And if, for example, we still can't define qualia in human consciousness, and you're going to need to be able to define qualia to program it. And the only way that you get a sentient AI is to have qualia programmed in there. At least that's my thinking. I could be wrong. But the bigger point is that for the foreseeable future, it is going to be co-creation. It's going to be a creation that humans are intimately involved in and directing, but with tools, because that's the way I see like everything that we're coming down the road with and releasing through Stability AI. Each one is a tool. It's a tool. And we just have these incredible tools, right? And the other thing that trips up the human mind, in my opinion, is like to the human like numbers, right? So for most humans, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, a lot. That's why humans don't understand the exponential function. They have a really hard time with infinite or infinity, with all of that sort of stuff. And so when humans, the big thing with humans is why? Why? I mean, you have children, right? Dad, why? And I get it, right? We should ask why.
Yes.
The challenge is in investigating these latent spaces that you referred to. The only way to get there, for the most part, at least for now that I see, is to have this matrix array of
Yes.
million in the array.
Yes.
And we are not designed to function like that, human beings.
No, we're not.
As impressive as these quantum computers that we carry around in our skulls are,
Yeah.
they were not designed for that kind of iteration of
No.
discovery. But the point that I always like to underline is, but they were designed to invent that.
Yes. Clearly, by definition. But it's also that, like, AI as it exists today is the first tool I think that we have created that allows us to talk to machines in our language. And I don't
Mhm.
mean English, it means as us.
Yes.
Because one of my like bugbears forever is like anytime you do anything, like you learn coding, you do accounting, you do markets, financial services, models, law, these are all us trying to talk like machines. Right?
Right.
This is us learning insane levels of systematization, incredible amounts of jargon, trying to compress the extreme complexity of some crazy thing into like a one tiny term in a term sheet, whatever. Like these are us acting as machines. Like, whereas now we can actually have machines that are understanding us as opposed to, us going down in the level. It's early. We, I find the AI sentience debate a little bit. I mean, I don't know what to make of it, right? It's a little bit like, I don't know what we are sentient means to me. The questions about like P zombies already doesn't make any sense, on let alone the hard problem of consciousness. Now you want me to do that for an AI when we can't even do it to each other? I mean, like we are effectively all pointing questions at each other saying, this is hard, this is hard, this is hard. Which is like, yeah, it is. So let's just all agree that it's hard and then like move forward. Because we got to disagree and commit here. You're not going to get an analytical answer that makes anybody happy. It's just, there's no chance. I mean, we've been debating these questions about humans for 2000 years and we haven't gotten anywhere. So like, it's not like there's a sudden, oh, now we figured it out. Qualia, it came from this part of the brain when these things fire. Like that. Oh, like, so
Right.
we'll create our theories. Ultimately, my perspective, at least, I mean, there's a longer post that I'm kind of working on about, AI risk. But to create a Drake's equation for it effectively, to try and
Sure.
say, like, guys, I mean, we should systematize at least part of our thinking. But I think the sneak preview is a little bit like, we gotta know at some point if it starts exhibiting symptoms of agency or like having some internal consciousness or qualia that are not necessarily pattern matched to things that we input into the system, then guess what? Just treat it as you would treat anything. I think this comes back to our original conversation about SPFs. Like, don't be rude. Like, act as if you have discovered an alien intelligence, and worst case, you're wrong. It's fine. This happens, right? Like, to me, I feel like a lot of these discussions are analytical attempts to get a definitive answer for an exceptionally complex question, which I think is a fool's errand in the first place. Because, like, we can't do that for any complex adaptive system in any meaningful sense. Like, the only thing we can do is to try and learn and iterate and move our way through, right? Which is kind of how we do it anyway. So, I don't know. My personal prescription is that I think we should continue to do what works and
Yeah.
try to like not look for the God equation before we are willing to build anything.
Yeah. And I think that your observation about complex adaptive systems is right on the mark, because as everyone knows, all emergence from a complex adaptive system comes from below, not from above. So this idea that we can analytically, analytically have solutions for everything. I love your idea that I'm going to steal and broadly broadcast. For the first time in human history, we don't have to have humans acting like machines anymore. We now have machines that can understand us as humans in terms of what we want them to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so I believe that it's going to be a Cambrian-like explosion of innovation and creativity,
I think so.
because Well, because as we were talking about earlier, tell the story about doing the book for your son, because I think that's such a great story.
So there's a story that like my first son Vedant, when he was younger, I used to make up stories for him, for to help him go to sleep or generally just to kind of keep him happy. It's fun, right? I mean,
Sure, I did the
kids have the
same.
best imagination, so it's
Yeah.
fun. So the story started at some point when he was crazy about dinosaurs. So it was about these two dinosaurs who are in this Cretaceous forest. It sees a giant volcano erupting far in the distance. They're exceptionally curious. They want to try to go and climb it. And it has a lot of twists and turns, and they meet a bunch of friends along the way, and like river crossings, etc. Um, and the thing is, the story is a story, right? Like, I mean, it was fun to make it with him. But now I was like, because these tools exist, I can actually create and do a little bit of a picture book, which would be wonderful, especially if I can create it because he'll love it and then he can read it to his younger brother. Um, or just generally, I'll put it out there. And this is not something that would have been possible with like almost anything, right? Like before now, I could get somebody to draw it, like I was telling you, but like I would have to explain what I want them to draw. And I don't know what I want them to draw either, right? Like this is me figuring it out. I mean, what am I going to say? Like, a baby Tyrannosaurus Rex and a baby Triceratops are on on a like a log crossing a river. Is that what I want? I don't know. Like I'll have to mess with it to kind of figure it out. Unless I get my hands dirty, I don't know what to ask for. So I've been getting my hands dirty with stability to try and figure out like, oh, okay, this is how we can think about it. Like if I do this prompt, then what actually comes up? No, I want to change this aspect in this picture. Let me do in painting, out painting. Like it's been fun to mess with it. And it's a very simple example of something where you can use generative AI to create a bit of a story that you want to tell in a way that you want to tell it that you wouldn't be able to tell it otherwise, right? This is not a massive commercial enterprise. There is no, Rohit world like Disney World that's going to pop up, but it's fun. And this is the point of life. And like, it is something that I can do now that I wouldn't have been able to do before. I mean, like you talked about American Gods. I'm a huge Gaiman fan. So like when I was in college, one of the things I really wanted to do with one of my close friends is to make a graphic novel. And like we could write it and we tried to kind of work our way through drawing it. And he's a better artist than I am. But like it was such enormous amounts of work that it was just not something that two of us could do unless we dedicated like, I don't know, 10 hours a day for like a year. Because like you have to draw it and then ink it and then color. It's a huge amount of effort. And today, I think we could probably have done that after writing it like a few weeks. That's step change, right? Again, creative explosion. I think the amount that we are actually going to be able to see in the coming year, I don't think we are prepared for it in any meaningful sense. And I don't mean it just like commercial creative explosion. I mean indie for people to do things that they like.
I 100% agree with that. After we did the release of Stability AI with the full model with the weights, which no one had done, because that's given away the secret sauce. We had some kind of internally speculated on, how much, what are we going to see? And like everyone was very bullish, obviously, that we were going to see a lot of innovation because we need, through cognitive diversity, you're going to see a bunch of different things because people are better at, like, some people are really great at graphic novels, others aren't, right?
Yeah.
And so we were all uniformly shocked by the amount and the quality of the innovation, of the artistry, of what came. And it was like, our thesis was humans are the creative spark. If you give them the tools, they are going to come up with amazing innovations, like Rory said, that there is no practical reason for. But so what? That's great.
I mean, that's the point.
Exactly, right? I mean, the point is that you can now do your using our tech from Stability AI, you can do a good picture book for your son to read to your younger son.
Yeah.
And it's, it could start out as simply that, but then I might get a copy and I might be reading it to my granddaughter, who's coming, who I'm happy about coming, for Thanksgiving. And she might love it. And my daughter might say, who's an author, might say, hey, let me see that book. And you can see how it, through the stepping stones
For
way of
sure.
approach, right? It could turn it could be Rohit World because
We'll find a better name.
yeah. Okay. I agree. If I'm investing in this, first off, do you have an accounting department?
No, I'm moving to Bahamas as soon as I write this.
But the point is, from these many things that we now cherish, for a variety of reasons, grew out of things that were not that thing, right?
Yes.
And so when you have this continual burst of creativity where people who had limited ability in, say, drawing, right? So graphic novels. That's why I love that book, Unflattening, which I recommend all the time.
I know. I love it.
Yeah, it's a great book and he's very clever. But now, I mean, like, imagine this is a great example. It could grow and who knows?
Yeah.
But the base case that I love here is it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
If you are providing some other human or a group of humans with a way to experience the joy of creating something that they've always wanted to, but they couldn't find the right way to draw or the right words or anything, they now have this set of tools that can make them just excel at the very thing that they've always kind of, I've always wanted to do that, but now all of the innovation is taking away all of your excuses, right? As far as I'm concerned.
And, I mean, it's like curiosity was always the thing that pushes you to try stuff. Ability is what stops you from doing stuff. I think if the ability boundary gets pushed out, you can let curiosity have a further reign, right? Like, highly curious about a lot of stuff. Ability stops me from doing a bunch of those things. But guess what? If the ability barrier goes away, I'm going to go down to Mariana Trench. But
me too.
But not now, but that's the trade-off that we kind of play within. And ultimately, exactly your point. I mean, I think of it as I don't know, it's like your word processor. You can write the great American novel from it. You can also write anything else you like, right? I mean, you can write a blog post, a book, whatever. The processor is agnostic. What it does is that it allows you to do what you want, and then you choose what you want to do with it. So it's just pushing the ability boundary higher, ability kind of level higher, so that when your curiosity kind of rises, at least it's not like hitting a ceiling. It can move up a little bit.
Yeah. Ed made me think of a guest I just had on, Tinkered Thinking, who won our White Mirror literary essay contest.
I heard because it was a wonderful episode.
Oh, thank you. And I'm a huge fan of science fiction in general, and I love Black Mirror, even though it's just profoundly pessimistic. And so we got this idea for White Mirror, and he had a great thought back to kind of like the philosophy of business, which we're still kind of on here in a way.
Yeah.
Is he had the insight that I'd never thought of. And when he said it, I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And it was advertising grabbed all the positive emotions.
I
wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like we live in even advertising has changed, right? Like when you see these, the older shows, advertisings were very much like, here's a can of tuna. It's really nice. Go buy it. Like it was,
exactly. Or it was a list, a block of text. If you go way back, so-called advertising was a block of text trying to convince you rationally, why this particular brand of soap was the best.
Exactly.
Right?
It was very it's like, it's fine. I mean, that's totally okay. Advertising today is I actually remember some of the advertisements that existed in TV when I was growing up in India, because they were brilliant. they like those people, I think they could make anything they like. It was like, they had like whatever 30 seconds to grab your interest, tell a story. It's beautiful, it's funny, it's hilarious. It was like it was wonderful. But it's a great point that like it captured our positive attention because like everything else, especially with kind of the easy media landscape that allows us to do, you know, social dunking, you get going negative pays off, right? In many ways. It gets you a feeling of catharsis internally. I'm being charitable. But it also gets you a lot of other people kind of glomming onto that emotion and kind of blowing it out of proportion. Now, I don't know to what extent this is purely because of sort of the change in circumstances over time. I don't think it is, but like I think it is a very true thing to say that being doing overtly positive things has started to seem a little bit, I don't know, like it seems a little, oh, you have not thought about this deep enough. If you think about this deep enough, it's actually a dystopia. I feel, you don't have enough utopian visions written by really smart people. I think the example Tinker Thinking said is Jules Verne, wasn't he? That like
Yeah.
that it was
Yep. Yep.
neither pessimistic nor really optimistic. It's about the future where cool things can happen, and we need way more of that. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to read so much. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, but like the relentless pessimism kind of makes me stop reading it every now and then because I'm like, it's okay. Like, I do not want yet another war. It's fine. Like, I mean, even if there is a war, it's like I need some positive push so that the future feels like it's worth building.
Exactly. And like you've just given part of the elevator pitch for why I did O'Shaughnessy Ventures and why we're doing Infinite Films. What? Because they don't make movies that are inspirational anymore in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So somebody's got to make them. So I guess that's going to be me.
I mean, it's important. Like, and I think it'll be fun.
It's precisely right. And this whole idea of, it's much easier to be pessimistic and negative. It's like the old quote, pessimists sound smart and optimists make money.
Yeah.
And it also, it defaults to all of our base code in human OS. Like
Yes.
we are emotionally driven creatures. The dominating emotion is fear. The biggest fear is fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And so if you have a novel threat, everybody's going to pay attention to that novel threat.
Yeah.
And because we're programmed to do so. So I get it. But the whole idea of also it falls into all of our blind spots, right? So like one of the central things that you get these people who delude themselves into thinking that they know all there is to know, right? And it's a natural default I've found.
Yeah.
People actually, unless you confront them on it and say, let me ask you a question. Did you know that like Amazon was going to be one of the biggest companies in the world back in 1980? Well, of course I didn't know that because there was no internet. And okay. So how do you know now that like, that's it. Everything's done. We know everything. You don't.
End of history.
End of history. Like, exactly. What I mean, oh my God.
I mean, it's a bad title, but like
very bad.
I mean, the book was better, but still, man.
But yeah, I mean, come on. Because that it's easy to delude ourselves and to think that we know all there is to know. And like, we don't know a fraction of what there is to know. That's the exciting part.
Yeah.
The exciting
Otherwise, what's
part.
the point?
Yeah, exactly. The exciting part is that we get to learn, we get to invent, we get to innovate. And that comes with new knowledge. And so to presume that you know what new knowledge is going to be, talk about hubris.
Yes.
It baffles me. And yet, like, I'm happy that that's the default because I can be over here being really optimistic. And of course, I'm going to make a ton of mistakes, but at least I'm going to try to make new mistakes and interesting mistakes.
And I think part of it is that, like, there is this mimetic desire. if you're pessimistic and someone else is pessimistic, they tell you, hey, you're right to be pessimistic. You tell them, yeah, you're also right. Like there's this little circle that kind of comes up about like it starts to get called realistic, which annoys me. Um, and like a loop kind of gets created, right? And this more recent, in fact, like, you know, I used to read pretty much every Booker and Nobel winner in literature at one point. Then I stopped because I got depressed from reading. I was
Me,
like,
me too. Same. I exactly. I read all those books until
and
I was just like, ugh.
and then I was like, just why? Why is everything so bleak all the time? I used to say this about Indian literature, like everybody's dying, everybody's sad, everybody's upset. And I'm like, even if this is the case that in your story everybody's in a sad position, can you at least try to make sure that like I don't want to kill myself at the end of this book? It's not that much to ask, right? I don't know why everything is like that. Like there should be more fun, positive, optimistic books, but they don't get prizes. So anyway, like this is one of my, you know, biggest pet peeves, and this is why it needs to be pushed. And to your point about the future, like, I mean, I am like, I'm one of my ongoing projects is to look at all of the innovations that have happened in the history and try to figure out like why they happened or how they link to each other. And I have this broad thesis, which might turn out to be wrong. In fact, it probably will, that almost all of the innovation can be looked at as some function of like energy, materials, and knowledge. Energy because you need something to do the work, materials because you actually need a material to do the work, and like knowledge because otherwise, how do you know how to put them together? And if you push the boundaries of all three of those things forward sufficiently, then like you will keep hitting different barriers, right? We have enough materials and enough knowledge, but we don't have enough energy to do things, which are arguably in some cases how we feel today. Or like we have enough knowledge and enough energy, but like we don't have the right material to build something, space elevator being an example. And
Yeah.
like these things keep shifting. And like each time you hit a barrier in one, you level up something else in order to kind of push these things forward. And that's kind of the game, right? It's very kind of crazy to say that, like, yeah, we've kind of hit the barrier on all three. Now it's stopped. Like, we're not going to get more energy in anything. We're not going to get better materials for anything. And like, yeah, we're not going to know anything else. It's like, as an implicit assumption you make about the world, I mean, why would we've been wrong about it historically every time we have thought that? Might as well assume you're wrong now. And in fact, even if you don't think you're wrong for whatever reason, assuming you're wrong is a way better way to live life. It's like,
Totally.
you know,
I cannot tell you the number of times I begin talking with somebody and I start with, I'm probably wrong. But because when you program yourself to think that way, you don't have those restraints that many people have,
yeah,
where they feel like they need to be right before
yes,
they ever suggest or dream up something or whatever. They feel I've got to be right. And
yes,
so I'm all, constraints in many arts and sciences and everything are a good thing
mhm,
often. But when you get the constraints so narrowly bound that you're only going to propound for something that you have a pretty high degree of certainty that you're right about, my God, you're leaving 80% of some of your probably best ideas
yes,
out in the wilderness to die because you're too afraid to advocate and, oh, then I'm going to be proven wrong. And so when you have programmed yourself to say it yourself,
yes.
and your own mind goes, oh, well, if I can be wrong, then look at all these ideas that I have, right?
And just try it out, right? I think that's part of what like makes life good. It's you remind me of in Bell Labs, the Hamming question, like what's the most important thing in your like open question in your field, and why are you not working on it? And there can be good reasons why you're not working on it, but like the fact that that is a question that very few people thought to ask themselves kind of tells you more than it should. Because, this is not a question that should be blowing people's minds. It should be like, if you're at the top of your field, what else are you going to think about? But more importantly, I think it's like one of my others kind of long threaded explorations is to curiosity as the fundamental driver for a large amount of individual as well as sort of collective progress, because you have to decide where to put your time, energy, effort, money, whatever, right? You have to individually, collectively, we all have to. From an individual standpoint, if you're going to do that, the two ways is either you say, I love X, I'm going to go do that, and that's my life. And occasionally you will be right, in which case, Godspeed, you're happy. Occasionally you will be wrong. That's fine too. The second option is to try and optimize it top down, which I have done in my career several times as well, which is probably not the best way to kind of go about it because you can't get an intellectual answer to solve all of life's problems with an analytical equation doing a top down analysis, right? You can't do a TAM calculation to figure out where you should spend your time. You could,
Right.
but you shouldn't because you'll be wrong and you'll be upset.
Right.
So this is one of those cases where like you have to use the guide that curiosity gives you to kind of at least point the spotlight of your life in some direction where it gives you a little bit of energy and then see whether you can do it. And maybe you can, maybe you can't, but at the very least, you will be doing something that you think will be slightly more interesting and important. And for most people, I feel, especially today, especially at the margins, they could do more of that, right? I mean, maybe you can't do all of it all the way every single time, but small examples like being able to create a picture for your son is a way to kind of push the boundaries of what you actually want to do in life, or like writing, or like, it's even, I feel like it's even at the smallest levels, a little bit of rebellion actually helps spark the question of like, what else can you do? And we need way more of that. And I mean, that's what a white mirror society should get you to ask, right? Ultimately.
Totally. And I have a thesis that these new tools
Mhm.
will unlock a certain percentage of the population that had held themselves back from exploration, from being curious about things that were outside their ken, so to speak.
Yep.
I think that the tools are going to unlock, certainly not a majority, but a pretty reasonably sized cohort of people who will say, well, let's just stay with your example. You know what? I'm going to write a picture book about the
Yeah.
dinosaurs going to check out the volcano.
Yeah.
And for that group, it's like a hell of a drug, curiosity. I
Yeah.
can't remember. I think it was, I can't remember who said it, but she said, curiosity is a shit starter.
Yeah. That's a good phrase.
And it really is.
Yeah.
Like, so some people, in my way of thinking and interacting with others, some people just got very lucky and were just naturally voraciously curious.
Yeah.
And those are the people who end up doing pretty well, usually in life. Other people, they learn to become curious through a variety of explorations, et cetera. And then there's this group here that I'm talking about that, they have what I would define as normal levels of curiosity, but they still have that constraint of being afraid to be seen to be wrong or whatever. When they get these tools, that's going to unlock, I think.
Yeah.
And obviously the degree to which it unlocks it will be variable, but it will unlock it because they'll see, wait a minute, there is a way that I can write that graphic model. There is a way that I can become a fashion designer. There is a way that I can build a space elevator.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, that's all part of what I call the great reshuffle. And I think we're in the middle of it, and not really even the middle of it, honestly.
I think it's the early innings. I think one of the ways that I think about this is like, or one of the KPIs that I think would probably show it to be much further along is I think a lot more people are going to have portfolio lives, right?
Yes.
Like there is no, work home spots and that's it kind of thing. Like they will have multiple things that they're excited about that they want to do that they are actually capable of doing that they wouldn't have been capable of doing before for a variety of reasons, but now they can. I think that's important. I think it is genuinely important, especially in today's world, because I think one of the weird subsets of the last several years is that we all live much more atomized lives than we used to, which means this is important to create a little bit of a sense of community and coherence, right? Because we can all create with each other, which is yet another way we can connect. Because otherwise, you know, you meet everybody you know at work, or you meet everybody like there aren't that many communal places where you meet people, which means like unlocking more of those spaces are going to have more payoffs than you can perhaps immediately you would imagine, right? From an idle standpoint.
Oh, totally agree. It was one of the founding principles of my new company, that networks were actually going to become vastly more important than they were in the past,
Right.
because time, space, and geography have all collapsed. And it's very easy to move your digital zip code, and it's very hard to move your physical one even today. But now it doesn't matter. And this idea of communities are formed through mutual interests, through mutual passions, through all of these things. Well, guess what? Now you have all 8 billion of us that we can form these sub communities.
Yeah.
But to your point, that's a great thing, because
Wonderful.
the ability, we're social creatures. Again, back to evolution. I think like you've got to always try to say, does that make sense from an evolutionary point of view? Right? Like it does.
Yes.
That's not the be all and end all, but it's a good question to ask. And at least I think. And so like we are communal. Human beings are definitely gregarious, communal minded creatures. And so the ability to build communities in a variety of different ways with a variety of different people from all around the world is going to like, hello, exponential age.
I think it's important because, like, if you think about one of the, constant complaints I see from most people my age, like slightly younger, slightly older, like in that cohort, is we all have similar-ish problems where everybody became mobile at the same time, roughly, right? So, like, I left uh, home at 17 to go to college, whatever. And since then, like, all of my best friends have also done similar stuff from high school, but also afterwards. And as a consequence, we are kind of spread all over the place, right? Because trajectories take you in different places. Guess what? If everybody's mobile, it's like, high entropy system, right? So you're not
Yep.
all going to end up in the same place. Now, the consequence of that several years later is that you kind of go like, oh, dang it. Like, what do you mean? Like, some of my friends are like plane ride away 10 hours here, 10 hours there, whatever. Like, you don't meet each other very much anymore. So in the internet, at least, like you see quite often tries to create a community, go build land there, everybody move. It hasn't worked for the longest time for a number of reasons, right? I mean, economic being primarily, but also some social cultural reasons of like everybody can't just decide to buy a village in Italy and move there because, you gotta do something. So in order to unlock that, you need to unlock the economic side, which is starting to come about with some of the remote work, etc., type of work stuff that you're coming to. But you also need sort of the social communal side of people who are doing somewhat similar stuff. So you're not like all doing something random stuck together in a village where you don't know it. Because one of the principles, I forget where I read this, is like strong ties are incredibly important, which is what we're talking about. But you also need weak ties,
Yes.
right? And weak ties are harder to create de novo in random places because, like, you don't have a friend of a friend of a friend. Like, you don't, right? I mean, you all are sitting happily, you know, uh, somewhere outside Rome, but like, guess what? You don't know anybody in Rome. And that, so geography in some ways remains destiny for this. I think the weak tie is the part that, like, whatever network state, some of the city people kind of forget about. However, having more ways to create community is a way to solve that. Because today, like, I mean, like if you go anywhere in the world, can you meet people in your tribe, so to speak? Yeah, because you kind of found them through Twitter and the podcast and the writing and the books and the talks. Like there's ways to kind of create these communities that didn't really exist before, right? I mean, even I don't know, 20 years ago, if you were coming to London, like if you knew people in London already, you could meet them because you could call them. If you didn't know anybody in London, you had to go out and meet them. But like there is no third way to kind of create a community before you went there. It didn't really exist, right? Like
Right.
it's a different age.
And I was just in London a couple months ago. And to your point, now I had let's set to the side that for a long time I was in London all the time for business.
Yeah.
So I did meet people the normal way.
Mhm.
Okay. But this trip to London was really focused on Stability AI and the offsite that we were doing. The list of people who wanted to get together was so large that I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to London just to get together with all of my friends there. And almost everyone on that list I met through Twitter, the podcast, some communal global network that you then take down to like meeting the person via Zoom, talking to the person, interacting with them as another human being. And then guess what? You become friends, and friends want to see each other. That's a normal thing. That's a normal thing. And so I was so struck by it though. And so I was quite chuffed about it because it's like, I showed the list of people who had emailed or DM'd me or texted me. And I showed it to my wife and I said, that's almost 2 weeks worth of just good in-person visits. And I'm going to go back and do that because like, that'll be fun. That actually will be just a lot of fun.
Yes, precisely.
But it underlines and I think illustrates your point quite nicely. If like I'm an investor in anchorless Bangladesh. Guess what? I know a lot of people in Bangladesh. I've never been to Bangladesh. If I go to Bangladesh, though, my dance card's going to be full.
Yes.
Because of all of the incredible people that I have met through this particular thing. So I think that from the way I look at the world, I mean, I just feel incredibly grateful, but also insanely lucky that I am alive right now. Because like, are you kidding me? Like when you go back and look at, I think it was Brad DeLong is coming up with, I just subscribed to his Substack, and he's trying to figure out why was there no economic development prior to 1870?
And his book is fantastic and I could recommend it.
Yeah. Anyway, though, I was thinking about it and it was because, well, there are a lot of reasons, right? And many of which we've discussed earlier in this discussion. You know, I'm not a big fan of organized religion because like I was born into the Catholic Church, right? And I'm not religious at all. I'm not an atheist because atheism, in my view, requires even more profound belief than it's like, I know that there is not a God. Okay. Really? Really? Have you designed the thesis that contests that proposition?
Yes.
And so, I'm an agnostic. And what do I know? I'm probably completely wrong. Maybe maybe American Gods is right. And it's the old gods versus the new gods. And like Gaiman nailed it because he saw on a higher plane than I did. But my point is that so much of human history, we talk about regulatory capture, societal capture by religions. Let's not just pick on the Catholic Church here. Let's make it all, not all. Like we'll give the Buddhists a bye here, and the Taoists a bye, maybe a little. But the point being that they put these incredible oppressive systems in place that were, if you're cynical about it, that were kind of designed to keep whoever the man was, the man for the rest of history, right? and so we escaped that. We escaped that with the Renaissance partially, but then with the Age of Reason, with the founding of the Royal Society, with the ability to ask questions and do experiments and all those kinds of things. So I think like I'm giddy about it. I'm like incredibly chuffed about the next 30 years. I just think, and for me, they're like, dude, you're 62. Like, I know your dad lived until he was 97 and you have longevity but come on, why are you so excited? I'm excited because I have grandchildren. And like,
precisely,
it was one of the reasons why I was so passionate about stability AI and open AI, because I don't want my grandchildren to grow up where a panopticon controlled by the few tells them what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
So
I think, one of the funny things about seeing the AI revolution has been um, anytime a breakthrough is made, like before the breakthrough started coming, I was kind of thinking that, like, dang, there's going to be a foundational technology here that's going to take all the chips off the table. Because, like, they'll get whatever network effects, they'll have lock in effects once you create the technology. And now I'm like, dang it. I mean, but the release of a closed model and the release of the open version of that model are separated by like weeks, you know. So it's fine. We're all in it together. It's all good.
exactly.
So I've become more open to the idea that, like, at least having things open means like there will be a lot more experimentation for good and for ill, but like net
Absolutely.
experimentation has always been for good. Will it always be that way? I don't know. It's an empirical point. It's not a, theoretical point, right? There is no answer here. But at the same time, you can look and say, like, mostly we have kind of done the right things, and it feels like we want to do the right things going forward. And collectively, the explosion we have seen over the last like 2-3 years has been for the right things, right? I mean, like, people have been proclaiming doom with AI specifically for a long while.
Long while.
And not like the ultimate doom, even specific doom, like we're all going to be drowning in deep fakes. I've been hearing this and like, we can do that today though, right? Like, I mean, but we're not. It's just like, just because you can doesn't mean it automatically happens. Because like somebody needs to do these things. You can have better scams today, but I still get the dumb Nigerian emails because like I'm not their target audience. And they could level up their target audience to create a wonderful GPT-3 crafted message in order to part me from my money. But if they had the ability to do that, there are far easier ways to make money at that point than to like scam me for $100. So
and deep fakes, like what was a Potemkin village other than a deep fake? Right? I mean,
Exactly.
It was like so we've had them forever. But to the point, it's a great point because it also illustrates something else that I'm very outspoken about. You're absolutely right that the technology itself is neutral. The human using it is not.
No.
And so like there's a great quote. I can't remember who said it, but I loved it. It was like, hey, we discovered fire. And it was great, man, because it gave us bigger brains and it gave us all these things. It also was really dangerous. And so we invented fire warnings, fire departments, fire extinguishers, so the idea that like to blame the tool, it's a bit like saying, all knives should be made so that they can only cut food to be eaten or something to be cooked.
Yeah.
So knives should be made so they cannot kill another human or a animal or whatever. Well, it's the nature, and it's not the tool's fault. It's the lunatic who's running down the street after somebody with that knife trying to stab them. That's the fault. It's the human wielding that tool.
I mean, civilization is a wonderful concept. What else can I say?
Exactly.
It makes it so that, like, we're not like all wandering around worried to hell about like somebody bonking us over the head with something. Like, I mean, the entire point of progress has been that like we've kind of got to a point where, that's not necessary. I mean, I'll tell you a story. Like when I was in college, this was a time when BitTorrent was big. So like in the early 2000s, and Hadza was big, I think. Like at some point I downloaded a pirated movie and I got a message from Columbia TriStar. I remember like a message saying like, don't do that. So like, fine, I won't do it. It was for the worst movie ever. I don't know why I did that. It was like, it was for Bad Boys 2 or something. It was like horrible. Anyway, bad taste and like, a lot of free time in college. Anyway, but the interesting thing was like, I remember sort of music piracy at that point was super large, right? It kind of came up to be big. And then all of a sudden you started being able to buy a song for like 99 cents and kind of fallen off the radar effectively, right? It kind of like collapsed. I mean, it probably still exists, but like, who the hell is going to do all of that effort in order to pirate some music when you don't actually need to? So I think economic incentives are an extraordinary alignment mechanism that we've discovered, not to eliminate, like, philosophically the impetus for all crime, but to eliminate empirically, practically the impetus for a large chunk of problematic behaviors that we see around us, which is nice. Like, I like, you know, living in a place where we don't have to constantly look behind every corner to figure out if somebody's going to do something horrendous. Because A, what kind of life would that be? And B, in any system that is more complicated than playing Pong on your computer, there's always going to be externalities. It's just inevitable, right? Like, we have externalities in video games that are designed for single players because, like, that's how complicated systems are. And now think real life. Like, what are you going to do? Legislate away every single thing that has a problem? You can't do it because, like, the number of ways in which you can figure out a way around that legislation is infinitely larger than the number of legislations that you can make. And at some point, you hit a ceiling where people don't even know what legislations are and it becomes anarchy, right? So I don't know. I feel like we don't kind of give this enough credit. The fact that we live in what we have constructed, to your point, like this came out of our collective heads, a civilization where the collective um, force, impetus is to push our curiosity in such a direction that we actually get to do things for the benefit of each other, as opposed to necessarily detriment. Like, detriment is just not that beneficial.
I can, yeah, again, you're right. I thought when you were speaking of Doug Adams' quote about anyone who thinks that they can foolproof anything is underestimating the ingenuity of complete fools.
Oh, yes. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I've learned this far better after having kids.
Definitely. Children spend the first 3 years of their lives trying to kill themselves. And it is
100%.
your job as their parent to not let that happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's your, like, it's fun.
But there's always something that the child figures out or wanders into that you didn't think about, and then you got to dash. But also, it made me think of I'm a fan of Ian McEwan, and his most recent book is Lessons. And I'm almost done with it. And he makes early in the novel, he takes a man's the protagonist's story from the beginning of his, or the, like, when he was a kid, 7, 8, all the way up into his late 70s. And in the beginning, there's an incident in London, and there's a horrible accident that happens in front of him and his father. And his father's an army officer in the British Army. And a motorcycle hits a car, and the motorcyclist is thrown. And it's being told from the view of the young boy. And he said, all I thought was, how lucky that I live in a city, London, where everybody, I don't know where they're coming from, but they're already coming to help. We have created a system where something happens and a bunch of people you don't know come and help you.
Yes.
The first responders. And his own father went and helped and everything. So you might love the book. It's if you're a fan of his, it's gonna be
I
better.
read Atonement and I liked it, and I read, I think, Amsterdam, I think, is one of his, if I remember the name right.
It is,
which I loved as well. So I'll check this out.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the fact that the externalities of civilization actually help us is quite highly underrated.
Yes, I completely agree. Well, as usual, we've talked a lot longer than my nanny had scheduled me for. But you get to come back on because your homework assignment is to read the book that I told you about, Howard
100%.
Bloom's The Genius of the Beast, a Radical Revision of Capitalism. And we will have, I think, a wonderful conversation about the advantages and deficiencies in his analysis as we see them.
I mean, I'm a fan of, is it the same Howard Bloom, the writer?
Different
Just
Bloom.
checking. It'll go on the Christmas reading list.
There you go. Well, as you know, we're gonna make you the chief inceptor of the world here, and you get to speak into a magical microphone that is AI enabled. I will tell you, and you can say two things that will incept all 8 billion people on the planet. Whenever their tomorrow is, they're going to wake up from a wonderful night of sleep, and they're going to sit up in their bed, and they're going to think the two things that you are about to tell me were their own idea that they had in a wonderful dream, and that they immediately say, I'm going to start doing X. What you got for me?
I think my number one, I might have said it the last time as well, is going to be my Vonnegutian maxim, be kind. I think we could always use more of that. I think it is one of the singular flaws of human beings is that we do get susceptible to getting caught up in whether it's a negative cycle or because we live in a large, relatively impersonal world, to get caught up in the feelings of, I don't know, name your negative emotion. Being kind is it's underrated. It's still underrated. I don't know why it still is. We should do vastly more of that, because regardless of what any kind of immediate rational utility calculation you do tells you that you don't need to, that your calculation is wrong. Reality is right. Be kind.
Exactly.
The second one, I'm going to take one picked from our conversation today that, like, I would say everybody should try and create something after they kind of hear me speak. Doesn't really matter what it is. AI enabled, non-AI enabled, writing, not writing, painting, music, movies, new business, new code, whatever. I think trying to push the boundaries of what you want to achieve with what you should achieve is important. Do it yourself, do it with someone else, even better. I think the idea that creation is like this mythical thing is a bit of a myth that we've all built around each other. I think I had this recent realization that, human abilities are normally distributed, but like human achievements are power law distributed. And when we look back on human achievements, you go like, whoa, how did they achieve this? They must be superhumans. And this comes back to the Steve Jobs quote, right? Everything around you was built by people basically like you. I think it's important to flex our muscles so that we can try to sort of do more stuff and work with each other to be able to do that. I think, let your curiosity have a reign on your actual actions. And guess what? The world has changed. You can do more stuff than you could before. So why not give it a shot?
Exactly. The tools and the platforms are taking all of your excuses away from you. So
100%.
I'm a big believer in both of those. The only thing I would add to your first one is that I'm noticing that many people, at least the way I read them, are think that the words kind and nice are interchangeable. They are not interchangeable. They are two very, very different concepts. I'm not a particularly nice person, but I do try to be a kind person.
Yes.
Because they're very, very different.
I could not agree with that more. I mean, again, kids help. You're not always nice to your kids. You're always kind to your kids.
Yes, exactly.
The distinction is, it matters more than everything else in the world, right? Like,
exactly. Well, Rohit, as usual, a fantastic conversation with you. This time I did hit record. So we're actually got, for those listening, I'm kind of an open Komodo guy. And so we recorded a while ago now, which was also a fantastic conversation, if my memory serves and my notes serve. just the little detail that Jim forgot to hit record. I mean, do I have to do everything?
We will soon have an AI that does this for us, and it'll
Exactly. That was like, that's my real reason for my investment in stability and everything.
Yeah.
I want the AI to turn the goddamn recording on when I start a podcast.
You know what? That was our secret loops conversation. It's all good.
Exactly. Shh. Listen, this has been great. And till next time, my friend.
Indeed. It was an absolute pleasure. Can't
All
wait
right.
to do this again and see you here.
Yes.
The only guide we have is our desire and our curiosity.
Once you find your purpose, it also leads to a happier life.
Even at the smallest levels, a little bit of rebellion actually helps spark that question of like, what else can you do?
He says, oh, like all fortune's shadow, opaque on arrival, inevitable in retrospect.
I would say everybody should try and create something. Doesn't really matter what it is.
Everything that gets invented started out in a human mind.
AI is the first tool that we have created that allows us to talk to machines in our language.
It is going to be co-creation. It's going to be a creation that humans are intimately involved in and directing.
Human abilities are normally distributed. Human achievements are power law distributed. Let your curiosity have a reign on your actual actions.